You don't have to look far in our world today on any given day to see the effects of evil and corruption. Since the rise of cable news one generation ago, the internet a half a generation ago, and social media less than a half a generation ago, it seems like the presence of evil and the corruption of our society is in our face in an alarming way and in a devastating way that can oftentimes result in discouragement, disillusionment, hopelessness, even in the lives of people who really are the good fabric of our society, trying to do their best to live among their community and be a positive influence in their family, in their school, or through their church, or in their department they work in. And yet, sometimes believers can feel overwhelmed. And then other times, believers can feel like they just have been relegated to the sidelines with no opportunity whatsoever to have any kind of an impact on something that seems almost too far gone and hopeless to even try. And then others can just get swept up in the anger of the day and become keyboard warriors or social media warriors or angry individuals that don't help themselves or anyone else around them. And in the face of this situation we find ourselves in, Jesus has some truths for us. They were given in Matthew 5, and I draw your attention there, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, actually toward the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, after he describes the fact that his kingdom citizens in his heavenly spiritual kingdom, people like us, have a different character than those who don't have Jesus. He goes on to say that his kingdom citizens not only are different people from the rest of the world at the heart and character level, but they have a unique opportunity to be part of his plan to influence this world for good. The world, according to Jesus, is supposed to be a better place because of the presence of Christians. And I think we, the members of Bible Baptist Church, average, everyday, ordinary people, have as much a stake in what kind of society we live in as our elected officials or as our first responder community does. We know that the first responders shape our community in a large way, and we appreciate them and thank them and pray for them and value them. We know that our elected officials influence and shape the society we live in. So we're careful about who we vote for and how we advocate in the political realm. It's shaped by our faith. But what I want us to realize is it's not just the politicians, it's not just the elected officials, it's not just the policy writers, it's not just the first responders or those who fill government roles, it's every single average, everyday, ordinary person who's part of Jesus' family who has a role in making this world what we all wish it were. And that brings us to Matthew 5, verse 13. The words are on the screen or in the notes that you received or in your own copy of the Bible, of course. And I want to ask you to say the first 7 words of verse 13 together with me out loud. And then I'm going to read the rest of verse 13. And then I want you to say the first 7 words of verse 14 together with me out loud. This is all just a mechanism to get you paying attention. And then I'll read the rest of it as well. No, actually, I want what you say out loud to be what sticks with you as you leave here today. You ready? First 7 words of Matthew 5, verse 13, and then I'll read the rest. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Now together again. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hid. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Never has this dark world and corrupted world been in greater need or more obvious need of light and salt. We are, if we will step into what Jesus has called us to be, exactly what this world needs right now. There are 3 realities about salt that I'd like to give you today to meditate on and then take with you. And then there are 3 realities about light. First, consider the statement, you are the salt of the earth. What did Jesus mean when he said you are the salt of the earth? Well, the first thing I'd like to say about salt is that salt's function is preservation. We live in a corrupting and a corrupted world. The world has been infected by sin, and sin brings decay. Sin brings destruction. It's always been that way. That's not new in our generation. Sometimes people wonder, why did God in the Bible go through the trouble of saying, thou shalt not do this, and thou shalt do that? It's because he knows what's best for the world and the race that he created, the human race. And so he speaks to us and he says, if you do these things, it's going to be so much better for you. And if you don't do these things, it's going to be really difficult for you, and it's going to bring difficulty into your life. And so when our world and when we as a human race defy his instructions, we invite consequences, not because he's mad at us, but because he's told us what to do to avoid destruction, decay, and corruption. And so, as this world largely says no to God and yes to sin, it surprises no one that corruption spreads. And that's where salt comes in. In the first century, when Jesus spoke these words, they didn't have refrigeration, right? So what did they do to preserve meat? What did they put on it, everybody? Salt, because it preserves. They would also use salt to put into wounds to disinfect those wounds. Even today, we gargle with salt water when we have a sore throat because Grandma said to do that. Why? Because salt has disinfectant properties. Athletes have to take large doses of salt to restore the salt reservoirs in their body as a result of having expended sweat and lost their salt content. You can die from a low sodium level. And the fact is that this world needs people like you and me to be salt, because wherever salt is, there preservation in response to the decay can occur. In 2 Timothy, Paul says, as the time moves on throughout human history, evil men and seducers shall become worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. And so that's an indictment on our society, that there is evil and that there is deception, and it spreads, and that brings corruption. But here's the good news for people in this room today. When you leave this room, you can push back on the corruption instead of the corruption infecting you. Why? Because you are salt. You have agency. Wherever there's a believer of Jesus who's living righteously, who's walking in fellowship with Jesus, and who is exerting influence wherever they live, there salt is being applied, and preservation is being offered, and corruption is receding. So here's the point. Just because the world stinks doesn't mean your home has to stink. Just because the world has gone off the rails away from God doesn't mean you have to go off the rails away from God. You have agency and you have influence. Hey, just because the world is corrupted, what about the street you live on? Do you know your neighbors? Have you talked to your neighbors? Could you be salt in the lives of your neighbors? What about the classroom where you go to school or the classroom where you teach? What about the classrooms where your kids will be in tomorrow? Do you know the teachers? Do you know the school board? Do you know the administrators? This is where God's people in 2025 can push back the decay of society as they realize that they actually are God's agents, salt, applied to the corruption of this world for its good. Now, none of us can tackle the whole world, but there are enough Christians spread out so that if we are salt wherever we are, we can preserve. The second thing we know about salt is that salt can only affect what it contacts. If you have a piece of meat hanging here and a container of salt hanging here, for the meat to be preserved, you have to get the salt out of the container and onto the meat. So where, Christian, follower of Jesus, is the salt of your life affecting the corruption in this world, or the tissue of this world to prevent corruption? This is why I love it when Christians volunteer to serve in elected office or in governmental roles or as school teachers or college professors. This is why I love it when Christian people serve in the military and in the law enforcement community and in places where they can be a salty influence in the lives of people around them, because when you carry the love of Jesus and the truth of Jesus and the presence of Jesus in your heart, soul, and mind, and you move into this world in different ways where people have needs and where you have the opportunities to exert influence, all of a sudden you can be salt there. That's why I love the fact that members of our church on any given month will be volunteering in the Livingston County Jail to try to reduce recidivism. That's why I love the fact that members of our church will be volunteering this month in the Pregnancy Help Clinic in Brighton to come alongside of young moms that are struggling with where they should go from here. And it's why I appreciate the fact that members of Bible Baptist Church serve with Love Inc. in our community to meet people in vulnerable places and to try to share the love and the truth of Jesus with them. It's why I love the fact that maybe 100 or so folks in this church will volunteer every week or two in the children's classrooms in our children's ministry programs, because at the early ages, they're able to begin telling these children that God loves you, God created you, the Bible is true, and Jesus is the way to have a relationship with God. And here's a cool thing. They even tell them to obey their parents in those classrooms. So great incentive to enroll your kids in children's ministry. But the point is, this is where we do salt work. So where will you be salt? There is a temptation to think that the only solution is we need to isolate ourselves from this corrupt world. But Jesus never said isolation is the solution. He said infiltration is the solution. I know some of you, your whole goal is, I got to work really hard the next 10 years, because in 10 years, I'm buying a big piece of land with a bunch of trees. We're going off the grid. There's going to be no internet connection. I'm going to build high walls around it. We're going to live off the land. I'm going to wrap it in tinfoil, and we're going to just isolate ourselves from this lost, broken, evil world. Okay. I understand the sentiment, and we should protect our children with things like internet filters and lots of controlling helicoptering over what's streamed in the home and who's influencing the child. I understand that. But isolation isn't God's plan. Who gets helped in this world? For God so loved the world. But the world's awful. For God so loved the world. Who in this world who is deceived and deceiving gets helped by you isolating yourself? So here's what I have to say to some Christians. Stop complaining that it stinks where you didn't put salt. So if places near you stink because of corruption, then you know your role. Be salt. The Church of Jesus Christ is God's one offensive agency in this world to stem the tide of corruption, to storm the gates of evil, and to see evil recede and righteousness advance. The third thing I would say about salt is salt that loses its potency loses its usefulness. I say that because Jesus said that in this verse we've read this morning. Jesus says, if the salt loses its flavor, what's it good for? Just to be thrown out in the street. In fact, when salt got diluted in the first century as a result of being corrupted by other elements, salt's potent. The way to reduce the potency of salt is to corrupt it with other diluted ingredients. And when that happened, as it sometimes did in that day, what they would do is they would throw that salt out in the street, and it would fill in the holes in the cobblestone Roman streets where the horses and the soldiers and the citizens walked. And Jesus says, you have to keep your potency if you're going to be who I've called you to be. So in other words, salt's potency depends on its purity. And so that's a challenge to the Church of Jesus Christ. Because sometimes, instead of being a salty influence who pushes back corruption, we are instead being more influenced by the world than we are influencing the world, and therefore we are becoming diluted, impure, unpotent, and good for nothing, to borrow a term from Jesus. Believers need to realize that in a day when evil abounds, we have a responsibility to live holy lives and to make sure that we don't become diluted. So I would encourage you, the lyrics you listen to in music, the entertainment you choose to consume, the people who influence you in your life, if the messages are opposite to the message of Scripture and the holiness of God, you ought to take very seriously your responsibility to protect the purity of your mind, heart, and soul so that you can be salty. And when I say be salty, I don't mean have an attitude. I mean live pure. I am so burdened as a pastor that our church would be part of the solution. And so that's why we have programs, and that's why we built a larger facility, and that's why we invest in communicating to the community and printing literature and hiring staff and keeping the lights on. And that's why we try really hard to do our work. But you know what is more important to our work as a church than our facilities and our programs and the talent that we can assemble in our volunteer teams? You know what's more important? The purity of this church. Because a little potent salt is far more important than a whole bunch of diluted salt that just needs to be done away with into the street. Paul told Timothy to keep yourself pure. Listen to these timely words from James. Pure religion is to keep oneself unspotted from the world. This is what God's called us to. Salt that loses its potency loses its usefulness. I've told you 3 things about salt. Now let me tell you 3 things about light. First of all, our light doesn't originate with us, but with Jesus. In the Scripture, darkness is always a symbol of lostness, deception, blindness, deceit, confusion, and light is a symbol of God's truth and wisdom. I'm beginning a new teaching series next week on the book of 1 John. If you want to join us, the next 7 or 8 weeks, we'll spend 7 or 8 Sundays studying verse by verse through the book of 1 John, and the theme of 1 John is love and light. And to borrow a phrase, what the world needs now is love and light. And that's what 1 John's all about. And 1 John says, in a verse that we'll see next week, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. God is what this dark world needs. But Jesus doesn't say here in Matthew 5, verse 14, I am the light of the world. He does say that in 2 other places. He says, you are the light of the world. How can we be the light of the world? Well, I will tell you this. We don't have anything to offer this world aside from Jesus in us. Do you know how Romans describes the human race apart from God? Here's how it describes us. This is not going to flatter you. Their foolish heart was darkened. We have foolish and blind hearts without God's saving grace. Jesus said that he came into the world to be light, but men loved darkness rather than light. Peter says that God is calling you out of darkness into his light. In fact, if you're new to the faith or to the message of Jesus, I want to tell you something very basic. Salvation in Jesus is likened unto having a light come on in your soul. It's like you're confused, you have questions about eternity, about God, about where you stand with God, about how to make sense out of life, and then all of a sudden this light comes on, and the light is Jesus. And what the light shows you is that you are a guilty sinner who's offended God, and yet he has sent his son to rescue you, a guilty sinner. And that his son went to the cross, and that he took our sin there, and that he was buried, and that he rose from the grave 3 days later, and that God did that so he could rescue you from your dark, sin-filled soul. And when I say you, I mean we. That's what Jesus did for us. And salvation is when that light comes on and you go, whoa, I need Jesus. I see it clearly now. I have a soul that's going to live beyond my funeral forever somewhere, and Jesus came down to rescue me who has disqualified myself from heaven. I'm not qualified, but he is. Most people who don't go to church assume church is a bunch of people who are trying to cross all their T's and dot all their I's and check all their boxes so they can get to heaven. But that's not what church is. Church is a bunch of people who figured out that there aren't enough T's to cross, I's to dot, or boxes to check, and they are hopelessly lost unless Jesus rescues them. So they've turned to him in repentant faith, and he has saved their soul, invaded their life. Now he walks with them as a light on the inside, and they have a responsibility every Sunday to get into his presence so that they can receive his light, so that they can shine brightly for him. And that's what it's about. Jesus says, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus says this in John 12, I have come as a light into the world, that whoever believes on me should not remain in darkness. So I want to say this to believers. You have a responsibility to let Jesus light you up and shine for him. A tourist was traveling on business to Europe, and he knew he needed to bring his wife something home from France. And so he bought her quite an expensive matchbox that was made of a substance, allegedly, that glowed in the dark. It was a rare substance. It was an expensive piece of sort of artwork for the home, but it was a matchbox. And he brought it home, and he was excited. It had been in his luggage for the whole journey, and so he took it out of the luggage. He got home, they turned all the lights off, pulled all the shades, and it didn't glow. And he wondered what the problem was and if he had been hoodwinked. So there were some French words on the little matchbox. So he found a friend who spoke French, and he asked the friend what the French words said. And what the matchbox said, imprinted on it, was, if you want me to shine in the night, keep me in the light. This was one of those substances that has to be exposed to light all day long, and it had been in his luggage. It has to be exposed to light all day long so that when the lights go out at night, then it can shine. And here's what I want to say to Christians. When you open the Bible in the morning and spend time alone digesting Scripture, that's you exposing yourself to the light of God's truth. When you spend time in prayer, that's you receiving light from God, opening yourself up to the light that God has for you. We can't shine in a dark world if we don't open up the connection between us and the one who says he is the light. I would also say this. Christians need to remember that it is the righteousness of our lives, it is the holiness and presence of Jesus, and it is love and grace and mercy in the face of evil that gives testimony to the love and grace of God that this world needs. I would say this, just seething in anger and resentment isn't going to shine much light. It's possible to have a lot of heat, but not any light. And one of the things each of us needs to ask ourselves is, what should I do in the face of evil? Now, on one hand, I would say this. If you're not angry, you might not be paying attention in some ways. But what are you going to do with that? Well, Jesus tells us, you shine like light. And that brings us to our next statement about light. Not only does it begin with Jesus, not us, but lights aren't lit to be hidden, but to shine. It's encouraging to know that darkness can't hide light. You know, the darker it gets at night, the brighter the stars shine. And if you go to a dark sky park, like in the Mackinac area, where they have protected an area from the pollution of man-made light, You look up in that dark sky park at the dark night sky, and the lights are even brighter. Hey, that's good news for Christians living in dark days. The darker the night, the brighter the light can shine. According to Jesus, only you and I can dim our light. Evil can't. Because he says, don't put your light under a basket. So here's my question to Christians. Are you hiding your light under a basket because you want to fit in and blend in and not rock the boat and want to be accepted? Hey, listen, I think a lot of us need to be done with worrying about being accepted by a world that crucified Jesus. And instead, take the basket off the light. Now listen, be kind, be loving. Don't be a jerk for Jesus, but shine, live boldly, live brightly. And here's the big message today. Get engaged. If you're attending Bible Baptist Church and you've been attending here for some time, here's my question. What are you going to do with Bible Baptist Church to shine? Also, I would say wherever you go away from Bible Baptist Church, when you leave this place, where are you going to shine? And it literally is in your schools, in your classrooms, in your shops, in your departments, is where you're going to be called to shine. We're thinking a lot these days about Charlie Kirk. And one of the things he did, and of course there's no one perfect in this world, including me and you and Charlie, but one of the things he did that I think is a really good example is he went to the places that a lot of Christians are intimidated to go or who wouldn't want to go there. And he went to those places and he tried to shine for Jesus by telling the truth and by shining the light. And one of the things I was thinking about as I heard, I've heard a lot of video clips of Charlie the last week or so have you, no doubt. And Nicole sent me a clip that I hadn't seen. And he said that we are to be salt and light. And I thought, well, I'm preaching about that this Sunday. I wrote this sermon before Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And I haven't changed any of it. But here's something he said that I didn't see until a couple days ago, and I want to show it to you real quick, a 30-second clip.
This beautiful country that we enjoy, that we appreciate, you know why it was formed? It was formed because Christians decided to break outside of the walls. It was formed because Christians decided to say, you know what? It doesn't just matter what we do in church, it matters what we do outside of church. Jesus called us to be salt and light. What do salt and light have in common? They change the environments they come in contact with. They don't conform, they don't affirm, they transform what they come in contact with. My question for you, and we'll close with this. Are you transforming the environment you come in contact with? Your place of work? Are you transforming your family? Are you trying to make it more Christ-like? Are you trying to lift people up? Are you trying to reject evil?
How can he say it so much better in 30 seconds than I can say it in 30 minutes? I don't know. I resent that, actually. But you get the point. We got to go outside the walls of the church, and we are Jesus's intended lights for this world. And that brings us to the last point. Lights shine so that something else may be seen. You don't turn on your headlights so you can look at the headlights. You turn on the headlights so you can see the street, right? You don't turn on your oven light so you can look at the oven light. You turn on the oven light so you can see what's being baked. You don't turn on the porch light to see the porch light. You want to see what's on the porch. We don't shine so that people will notice us. We shine upward so that people will see God. And that's what Jesus said. Jesus said in verse 16, "Let your lights so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven." In other words, Jesus says, while you shine, your job is to point people to the Father who sent me as the Savior. And so that's what we do. We shine so that they will see him. We shine so that they, through our little old average, everyday, ordinary lives, might see Jesus, might see God. We want people to see the goodness, the wisdom, the kindness, the grace, the holiness, and the character of our good God because they need him. And many of them want him but don't realize he's what they need and want. And that's where we come in, to shine brightly, to point them to him. We, according to Jesus, are a city on a hill. When we purchased this church property 5 years ago and started working with engineers to determine where we could build the building on this 46 acres, it was cool to me when I discovered that the only real natural place to put the building was at the highest point on the property, actually one of the highest points in Livingston County. And I thought to myself, isn't that cool? Because the church is a city on a hill that is intended to not be hidden. And so may we shine here, and may we go from here shining, pointing to him.